Welcome to everybody who's joining this webinar. As you're joining, you can, while we're waiting for people to enter, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can say your name and where you're from, and perhaps mention your line of work as well, so we can have a sense of what aspects of the botanical industry are here. Thanks so much. And also, so we'll spend the first 50 minutes talking and set aside the last 10 minutes for questions. And so if during the course of the webinar you have a question, please make sure that you enter it in the question and answer section rather than the chat. And also when you enter something in the chat, make sure that you click to everyone, all panelists and everyone, and not just the panelists. Otherwise we can't see, everybody else can't see you. So Ina and Julie, if you can re-enter your introductions so that everybody can see them, that would be great. And I'm going to go ahead and begin now. So welcome so much to the third in the series of webinars hosted by the American Botanical Council and the Sustainable Herbs Program. And I'm very pleased to welcome Andrea Zangara, Scientific Marketing Manager at Euromed, and Brian Zapp, who is Creative Director at Applied Food Sciences. And they're here today, and we're going to talk about the business case for sustainability. Next slide, Zara. Next slide. This series is part of the Sustainable Herbs Program Sustainability and Regenerative Practices Toolkit, which is a collection of best practices for really directed at the botanical industry around bringing more sustainable and regenerative practices into the work of the dietary supplement industry. And this is the third in the series of these webinars, which are all made free. We're able to make them free due to the generous support of our inaugural underwriters. And Euromed and Applied Food Sciences are two of those inaugural underwriters, for which I'm very grateful. So with that as an introduction, I would love to turn to the conversation. And again, for those of you who are joining, we've asked you to just make an introduction, say who you are, where you're from, and make sure that you list to all panelists and attendees on the drop down in the chat. So Brian and Andrea, welcome. And I wondered if you could start, Andrea, maybe you could start and just say the ingredient suppliers are kind of an invisible part of the dietary supplement industry. Just say a few words about what Euromed does.
Euromed was founded in 1971 by a German pharmaceutical company called Madaus in order to establish a vertical integration supply chain for their botanical raw material that were included in their pharmaceutical products. So since then, we have maintained our pharmaceutical standards and applying it to nutraceuticals applications as well. We are actually a leading producer of standardized botanical extracts, natural active substances for the pharma, nutraceutical, food and cosmetic industries. We have two manufacturing plants, one in Barcelona, where we produce more than 5 tons of biomass annually, and another one in Murcia, which is southern Spain, where they developed and produce the most innovative fruits and vegetable concentrates. We are proudly applying a full control and transparency, vertical integration, and so I am very glad to be here and discuss with you what we do for the sustainability.
Great, thanks so much.
In our market.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for having us. This is such an important topic to discuss, and You mentioned it, ingredient suppliers are such a key cog in this wheel that is often overlooked, and there's a lot of responsibility placed on product manufacturers, and a lot of which is really on the ingredient suppliers. So at Applied Food Sciences, we focus on functional botanical ingredients. Most of the time, our small kind of boutique set of ingredients are focused on really just either enhancing certain actives or improving the delivery system, so making them more water soluble or easier to work with in formulation. And really, that's what we focus on. Our ingredients are really high quality, and to us, that includes the portion of it which is responsible as well. And that's really where sustainability comes in for us. So we're grateful to be a part of this conversation, and and the likes of you guys, Ann, and the Sustainable Herb Program with ABC and Euromed. I've seen you guys all over lots of sustainability information over the years. So, it's really an honor to be a part of this conversation with you guys.
Great, thanks so much. Brian, since you brought it, do you want to continue and talk about what does sustainability mean to you in concrete terms in sourcing raw materials?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a part that we've really constantly tried to bring our attention to, because it's evolving over time and there's no right answer. But for us, it tends to be always focused around 3 key areas. And the first one is environmental leadership. And that's, really along the lines of sustainable growing or regenerative agriculture, or actually, as we call it, progressive agriculture, because the more we learn and are constantly developing our plans, the more we recognize that systems are constantly evolving, and we learn more about the environment, about native trees and fauna, and it just continues to develop what we know and how to best care for the planet. The second piece is really on social responsibility. So it's one thing to take care of the plants and the animal kingdom around our ingredients. What about the people involved in sourcing this material? Most of the time, the raw materials that we are looking at for botanical actives are derived in foreign countries. Many times it's underdeveloped areas. And so it's really important to not lose sight of the people that are involved in that and make sure that it's a responsible and ethical form of practice in sourcing. So that's number 2. And finally, it's the traceability aspect, which really is, none of the first 2 really matter unless it's all transparent, at least to the best of our abilities. And that's including economic accountability. And so those really are the key concrete phases that, regardless of how things evolve, it tends to really balance across that environmental leadership, social responsibility, and accountability.
Great. Andrea, are there specific things you want to add to that? Maybe thinking as you do, like why Euromed, why it makes financial sense, business sense for Euromed to make these investments?
Well, I'm glad that Brian mentioned traceability. This is really one of our key values and a promise that we need to maintain with our customers. Behind traceability, there is quality control, there are standardized procedure, and of course, as I said, we are a registered pharmaceutical company, so all the steps from the seeds to the final extract are scientifically based and transparent. As I said, we've been founded by a pharmaceutical group exactly with the aim of producing a sustainable and traceable raw materials for medicinal products. So since then, we try to improve our supply chain, particularly by establishing our own plantation. And so the goal is to reduce the collection of wild plants and establishing sustainable plantation whenever possible. When wild collection is in place, as Brian said, it's really important to care about the workers. And our purchasing manager is actually visiting all the sites. We have long-term partners and we visit them every year, not only to be sure that they comply with protocols, good agricultural collection practices, but also that those visits are also a sort of social welfare audit to make sure that there are safety measures in places, there are no children working, and the pickers are compensated fairly, etc. So from an economic perspective, we aim at reducing as much as possible the intermediary in order to have a full direct control on all the phases of the process.
Making decisions about where you're making the financial investment, right?
Financial investment has to be done and put in the right places in terms of making agronomical research, for example, or establishing a farming program. We did this for milk thistle in Central Europe. We did in Congo for the Pygeum. Pygeum is a protected species, and so there is a specific protocol to apply in order not to damage the tree. So Euromed has supported a number of initiatives there to train the pickers on the protocols. And we have a lot of examples where we invested considerable amount of resources in order to improve the whole sustainability and transparency processes for the benefit of our partners, our customers, and the final consumers, of course.
Great, thank you. Brian, do you want to add to that, talking about the risks? I mean, because all of what you're both talking about require an enormous amount of financial investment and time and site visits that you could reduce by just depending on middlemen and other people to do that work for you. So Brian, can you talk about perhaps the risks of not making that investment, if you all have learned lessons the hard way, or any examples you might have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, kind of going back actually one step to the previous question about how it just makes business sense. I think if we want to all set ourselves up for long-term success, then the question of sustainability is a really inherent piece of that. I think if you're not thinking this way, then it's a really short-minded, short-term, 2-3 year plan, right? And that's risky. Unfortunately, I feel like in the US, we tend to be really on this short-term timeline. And that goes to all areas of our business development, especially our suppliers and then their relationships. So, you know, if we're looking at in terms of short-term, then it's what kind of deal can I create now? And then knowing confidently that there's other deals behind it that I can just piggyback on and could just consume and overcapitalize, right? With regards to the business sense, you know, you're looking at 10 years, and to make this a successful product or ingredient or relationship for everybody, that's the timeline that you need to really start with. And what we're actually noticing now is, as 10 years go on, you learn new stuff, and it's actually, some of it might be the wrong information. And so it's constantly retooling and retuning that.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically, think about, it wasn't too long ago that American farmers suffered from the Dust Bowl, for instance, right? And you feel like, oh, that was ages ago, but not really. You know, that was, in the global scheme of things, that was relatively recent. And some of the research that's found on that is farming practices to, prevent that dust erosion or that wind erosion, right? And the more we learn about all our botanical processes and farming in general, especially industrial farming, the more we start to recognize how it taxes our land and how we continue to suffer long term. I mean, there's places in Africa where peanut production has happened for years and years and years, and all of a sudden now the land is virtually unusable for other crops, right? We start to learn more and more about the importance of nitrogen fixing crops and conditioning soil, and that's all for the long-term success of regenerative agriculture. I think the business sense hopefully is so abundantly apparent that it's silly to even talk about it, but it's necessary. I read recently we have 50 years worth of usable soil at its current rate of degradation, right? I mean, that should be headline news. Hey, we got 50 years left, and then guess what? No plants, right? No crops to feed our future. But instead we kind of put it off as if, oh, we're smart, we're humans, we're scientists, they'll figure it out, right? Somebody will find a solution. And they're probably right, but it doesn't mean that we should disregard it. And so, you talk to any farmer, they're going to hopefully be thinking in sustainable terms. But together, it really needs to connect from the source through the supplier all the way to the finished product in order for the full chain to make sense. Because if the finished products are pinching at every chance they get to get more certifications, more quality for less price, then it continues to push the pressure downward and downward. And by the time we see the ramifications of that, it's already too late. When we see the quality suffer, what has already gone behind the curtain and fallen apart? Maintaining equipment, paying employees fairly, taking care of health and safety, suddenly using other pest control because a long-term solution for responsible pest management is not available. It's just, those are many examples of things that trickle down the line. And by the time the end product suffers, what has already occurred behind the scenes, that's a real issue. And I know we probably jumped like 4 questions ahead, but I think that the way this conversation goes is it's all very related, and it's also a very complicated topic.
Andrea, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I could identify 2 major threats. One is from the due to the increased demand of botanicals, there may be some unscrupulous producer could make their way, and because some companies did not put an effort in establishing relationships or vertical integration, then the market may be flooded with products that are contaminated, frauded, or just not as they should. And another threat is actually from the nature itself. In fact, the herbal preparation can vary a lot depending on a number of events which are not totally controllable, like weather or other type of things, scarcity of workers, etc. So by standardizing this whole process as we do, we reduce the chances for variability to become an issue. And so, of course, there will be helpful to have more guidance from the regulatory bodies, more, I would say, a uniform approach at global level. Instead, there are still a lot of fragmentations. But that's one opportunity for a company like Euromed, because we stand up as a premium quality, because we do provide a in-depth quality control at all the steps from the seed to the finished products. And this also ensured sustainability to the health of the patients in some cases, because of course the dosages of an herbal medicine could vary if the whole processes are not standardized.
You know, one thing I really appreciate that you said, Andrea, is building relationships. And I think, you know, a company as well established and with the longevity as Euromed, it certainly has to be understood. And I think that's highly underrated across the board. And when we speak of investments and the lessons learned, and to kind of answer your question earlier, it's I think that's a huge piece of it, is building those relationships. I think there's no way to fully understand your supply chain and how to sustainably grow any product unless you see it for yourself. But that's not an easy step to take. You know, I think that the simpler step would be to maybe just trust some certification process, or trust what the farmers or your other supplier partners might say. But there's really no, better alternative than setting foot on the farms themselves. And we've this is a long process, because it's not like they have a blueprint for every ingredient that's out there. When we started our coffee practices implementation, it was a rough road. I mean, we were asking a lot of really challenging questions, and it was, received fairly well, but also based on a promise of commitment. And that meant money, right? That's financial commitment. Because if these farms are going to go through these pretty rigorous steps of economic accountability, environmental leadership, especially with coffee growing, we're talking about, protecting bodies of water and, ecological pest control and safe work environments and fair wages. I mean, we're asking them to reveal a lot of information to us. So we better put our money where our mouth is and make sure it's financially incentivizing for them. And when we started, it was tough because the demand wasn't fully there for what we were asking. So we kind of had to be comfortable living in a place where we're buying material that we don't have an answer for yet on our end. We haven't, we don't have the customer or the market necessarily for it. And that takes a lot of risk. It's not an easy thing for a company to be asked to do. But then again, this isn't an easy step for the farms we're trying to partner with either. Applied Food Sciences, unlike Euromed, has only been around for 20 years, but we've valued so significantly the relationships we built through that time, and recognized that without them, it'd be near impossible to start implementing these next steps and this progressive thinking. And that was 10 years ago. So building that first 10-year relationship before that really paved the way for, the trust needed to start implementing progressive and forward thinking, criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is even more evident now than before with the COVID situations, where unreliable suppliers could find their way because of increased demand. This is really when established relationships are paying back. And as you rightly say, it's nothing that there are no shortcuts. Euromed, it took the whole 50 years to become and to maintain a leading position in premium quality raw materials. One situation, for example, that I can describe in order to overcome sometimes the difficulties of having to deal with unscrupulous competitors or the adverse events from nature, is to establish your own thing. For example, our saw palmetto extract, which is a leading extract for prostate health, is coming from a specific area in the United States, and near Lake Okeechobee. That's where we established our installment in order to reduce the timing between the collection and the processing. That it's very short, it's about 24 hours, otherwise the beans starts to deteriorate. And of course, this was a very big investment that allowed us to create an inventory there, to establish a relationship by being with a proper institution. And yeah, so it's something that we are really happy about this decision, particularly because saw palmetto is one of the most adulterated herbs, because it's extremely expensive and labor intensive. And so that's another area where, together with the American Botanical Council and other partners, we are really involved in the fight against adulteration.
I wonder if both of what you're both talking about, and what I found from talking to a lot of different people is, that all this investment, looking down at the source, pays off in terms of the quality. That it's, without that, the quality is going to be questionable. What does that look like inside of a company in terms of where the resources need to go? I visited companies where there's quite a large marketing department, say, and one person in charge of sourcing. And so in terms of priorities and where the money flows, and can you talk some about that? And then what is the driver to change that? Like, where will the changes need to come for companies to make more investments down into the source? Either of you can respond.
Yeah, I'll start with a story that was impactful for me. We went and we pitched a nutraceutical company, and they're basically mostly a co-packer. And we had this lead-in video where we talked about our sustainable practices and, shaking farmers' hands and doing things the right way, all this, good kind of feel-good stuff. And then we went through our ingredient deck, and the presentation went well. And afterwards, they basically handed us a spreadsheet saying, hey, we want you to basically just give us information of what's the lowest price we can get, what's the most certifications you have, and where is it approved to use. And they're like, hey, it's all good that you are shaking farmers' hands, but we need 40,000 tons of material. And how are you going to shake enough farmers' hands to meet this need? And it presented a couple things. One, an amazingly challenging question, right? For our sake. And then, and that's on scale, responsible scaling. But then it also presented another piece of the puzzle, which was misalignment, right? This is a company, and they're looking for what's the maximum I can get out of a product for the minimum cost, right? And the sustainability is like, hey, that's a nice side story if we have it, but that's not our priority. Our priority is, is that max min. And we realized at that point something really important is that the alignment from customer to us is a pivotal piece of this. In other words, we could pound our head against the wall trying to convince this company or others like it the importance of this sustainable and responsible relationship. And we could even probably demonstrate quality and quantifiable reasons why the max min principle might have detrimental long-term effects. But, and for the record, we still knock on their door, of course. We're continuously, because who knows if they've changed, they have the right customer. But it's not our focus, right? Our focus is on like-minded companies that one of the questions they ask as they try to procure material is these important pieces. We've been very fortunate to work with some companies that really inherently understand that and actually push our guidance even further. Some of the most robust programs are customer inspired, and it wasn't like they were forcing us to implement them necessarily, but we completely full-heartedly adopted them. And that to me was a significant piece, right? And also maybe a key part of the problem and where things need to change, which is kind of the latter part of your question, is, what needs to change? And I think that's it. There's probably equal number of arguments on both sides of the spectrum as far as if where the quality can be detrimentally impacted. But I think if you have this consciously minded approach and you're taking care of the people and the environment and having that full transparency, I think that's where the benefits will be abundant on the longevity of the product. Because if you're just squeezing out one piece for price at a time, then you're just consuming and utilizing all those resources until eventually I think we're starting to find the times where there's none left. I mean, we all thought aluminum cans were infinitely abundant, and now all of a sudden, our Dr. Pepper is not going to reach the shelves, right? I think we're, at this time, especially during this pandemic, we're becoming so much more aware of the finite limitations of resources. And there's absolutely no difference when it comes to sourcing raw material in botanicals.
Andrea, I'm curious your thoughts on that, and to build on that, also thinking back to Brian's comment about the United States market being more price-driven and short-term, and as a European company that's been around so much longer, what you have found?
Well, our quality control is certainly the department where we pour more resources because we are very aware of the values of a proper quality product, and therefore we apply, for example, about 20 quality tests to each batch of botanicals, and we need to maintain the promise of our pharmaceutical grade quality as our we have a vast range of customers, from large pharmaceutical companies to food companies to nutraceuticals, small companies. So they're all expecting, rightly, our well-known quality. And for this, we just have, a couple of years ago, we built an R&D and innovation center in Barcelona, which is a 3-story building with all sorts of testing equipment and pilot plants, etc. We see the need for technologies that can provide safer products. For example, we invested recently quite a lot into a novel extraction technology that only utilizes pure water, and this obviously has an advantage in terms of targeting consumers that are more green oriented, but also provides extracts that preserves what nature provides. For example, pomegranate, figs, olives, fruits. The polyphenol profiles is the same as you would have in the fresh whole fruit. And all these advantages are, they also contribute to the promotion, the marketing promotion of your product. Of course, we are investing also quite a lot in clinical research. And so we want to provide a whole evidence-based experience to our customers, which is online with our tradition and our pillars.
I wondered in part how certifications, what role they play for either of you. I mean, you know, Brian, you referred to the value of shaking a hand, and yet all of us can't shake hands, and certifications do provide traceability. You know, there are certain values and that they provide an assurance to the end user. I wonder what each of you have found. Andrea, if you want to start, just, I don't know how many certifications Euromed is using.
Yeah, we have a number of certifications. We are continuously audited by regulatory bodies or external parties, and even our customers. Actually, we invite also our customers to visit our plantation in order to see firsthand how the collection, the drying process, how we care about the workers, etc. Those are things that are above and beyond certifications. But certifications are indeed important, also because a lab, for how well it could be equipped, but it will never have all the technologies that should be applied to verify the authenticity of a botanical. So in this case, we also rely on independent evaluations to support claims, or independent certification to provide authorities, and so on. Recently, we got the authorization for our organic extract line. So yes, we think that certification have their values within a mentality that also is going towards transparency.
Brian, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I totally agree with a lot of that, you know, the way Andrea was speaking about it, because it's a great first step, right? I think at the end of the day, we're talking about credibility with these certifications. And, you know, a supplier, a manufacturer, a consumer product, you can say whatever you want about a product, but at the end of the day, it's just your opinion, right? It's subjective. So these certifications act as a, you know, independent credibility check. And I think that's important. But they're also, you know, not without limitations. And actually, you shared an incredible article recently with me. And, you know, for the sake of being respectful for the certifier, I'm not going to really mention the name or the companies involved, but it presented a very interesting conversation around the limitations. And basically, one certifier working with cacao has a promise of no child labor, but yet in some audits, or not audits, but investigation into some of these cacao farms, they noticed there was indeed children working, in this case with their parents for the most part. So it wasn't necessarily like, you know, slave or child labor against their will. However, what stuck out to me was a really key piece of this. A notable certifier, notable companies involved, and yet when one of the children were asked, why are you not in school? The answer was, well, they shut down school in my area, so why wouldn't I help my family earn income and go to work with my dad? And this child, I think, is 12, 14, something like that. But, you know, it suddenly dawned on me, and it stuck with me for a long time, that that this is a bigger, more complicated problem, and no certification or responsible supplier is going to be the be-all, end-all answer. Some of it is beyond our ken and is a more systematic issue. You know, why is the school not shut down? I mean, from there, I thought about our own processes. And, we too have a part of our criteria, no child labor, right? And children of age should be in school or a learning environment of some sort, right? But what happens in these rural areas if the school is 50 miles away and there's no safe transportation? Or what happens if the teachers are inadequate or not qualified and it's a dangerous environment? It becomes apparent that there's so much more to this conversation than just putting demands about hey, here's our criteria. Are you guys going to follow through, on our checklist that we have here? Because otherwise we're not working with you. Are we really supporting these communities or not? We talked about a couple of things, and with our coffee is the most easy for us to speak to because we've been procuring coffee for 20 years. And we've recognized that some of the farmers we work with, they're in their 9th generation of farming families. And those are the farm owners, the pickers as well, and the workers are in their 4th, 5th generation, and sometimes longer at times. So there's an economic incentive for them to keep going, right? And suddenly to start putting demands of blanket statement criteria out there saying, hey, this is our one size fits all, audit, and you're either following these rules or you're not, it just shows that you can be equally unfair as a supplier, just putting our demands on these communities as much as anything. And again, where this all ties together is that, we suddenly have a 4th, 5th generation family that there's too much for them to keep going on, right? Now you lose that experience. Where's that detriment in quality, right? Coffee is a very hand labor intensive process. The beans are picked by hand, then they're sorted by hand, right? The actives change depending on the bean quality and when to pick it. That experience over 4 or 5 generations is irreplaceable. So what quality elements start to fall off? Sometimes put on by pressure from us, sometimes put on by irresponsible practices. It's a very complex piece of the puzzle. And, therefore nothing replaces going to the site and seeing it for yourself, right? And I mean, we've been fortunate enough that some of our customers have also gone with us and seen it for themselves and shared that story transparently with their customers. But, certifiers are an amazing first step. And if you're starting somewhere, that is a great place. That criteria is amazing and should be, your goal as a product manufacturer, if you're sourcing your own goods, et cetera. That's a great baseline, but it's not without limitations. And I think that's where being daring and taking that risk to go and see for yourself, that's something that's so important and easily overlooked. But to the credit, Andrea said this, it's one of his favorite topics, this sustainability piece, and mine too. 10 years ago, I would never think I'd be an ingredient supplier for my career, right? But I wouldn't have known then how fulfilling it is. And where that really matters is in those personal relationships where I've gone and met these people and, these heroes in the backgrounds of our videos and pictures, right? We've met them, we've shaken their hands, we've talked to them, and suddenly your heart becomes full and it becomes a very inspirational part of the business. And suddenly there's authenticity behind it. So it's way easier to stand on everything you say. Some firm in Los Angeles or the UK, they won't be able to give that to you, that authenticity. That's something you have to really generate yourself. So, so it can't be substituted by a certificate.
Well, you raise certainly a very important and topic difficult to find a right frame for, besides doing our best in terms of guaranteeing the welfare by inspecting and controlling and supporting. However, in order to limit this complexity, recently at Euromed, we are prioritizing NPD projects or new product development, focusing more on locally sourced botanicals. And that is has obvious consequences on having a better control of what's going on and improving the local economy and reducing the carbon footprint because the plantations are very close to the manufacturing center and and so on. So particularly in COVID times, this has been proven as, of course, an important project that is paying back because also does not require traveling to to maintain your inventories, etc. So that's another thing that we think investing in local is also one of the approaches for improving sustainable attitudes.
There's so many threads in what you all have mentioned, and one thing, Brian, that came out was that the challenges transcend any particular company, and yet you each as companies are competing amongst each other for buyers of your products. And I wondered what thoughts either of you have for ways that ingredient suppliers or up and down the supply network can collaborate and come together in a way that helps address these issues like climate change or social inequities that are so much bigger than any company, any industry.
Yeah, wow. That's such a great point. You know, we tend to always look at the differences of each other and trying to differentiate from each other. And it's often overlooked to see the common problems that we're all facing. And that, I mean, that's tough. I mean, fortunately, I feel in the natural products industry, it's a pretty tight-knit group. And we do recognize our reliance on each other. After all, applied food sciences, we're one ingredient typically on a label, right? It takes a lot of great companies to support our end customer and the end consumer, right? And so that's where I think we recognize that we're all in this together. And if we want the best success for all, then, you know, it makes sense to continue to support each other in the best way as possible. But, you know, actually one example, I'm actually drinking it today on purpose because this company called Riff, they do a cascara beverage. Cascara is the fruit around the coffee bean. And, you know, for sake of time, because I know we're on our Q&A spot coming up, basically one of our missions is that, okay, sure, we're paying fair wages and we're responsibly sourcing green coffee beans, but there's a whole nother part of coffee that can give back to the coffee growing community, and that's the fruit around the bean, right? Now we don't supply Riff their cascara, but we also produce a cascara extract of our own. And the CEO recently reached out to me and he's like, hey, you know, I recognize this problem too. You know, if we're continuously making one of the most commoditized products in coffee, you know, so reasonably priced, I guess, in the consumer's eyes, you know, how does that trickle down and how do we have that true sustainable footprint when it comes to the farm levels, especially when the environment's continuously putting pressure on it with climate change and all these things. And cascara is one of those answers. It's a solution, right? And so he reached out saying, I want to start a cascara initiative or, you know, some sort of co-op to basically continue to spread the awareness of the importance of cascara. Not to mention that it's a great kind of earthy, trendy, tea-like, you know, flavor. You know, that's a great example of somebody who doesn't directly work with us, but is starting to bridge that gap, saying we have a common goal here. And let's not just try to, we're all taxed. We all have so much on our plate. Why would we all just try to tackle this individually and kind of get, you know, in these circular problems that we've all run into? I thought that was a brilliant way of reaching out and something that we're continuing to push forward in. And yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful point. I'd love to hear your take on it, Andrea, or if you've done, you know, similar things in the past that could show as a good guidance and example.
Certainly, I think, as you say, it's a small world, and in the raw material producers, the big guys or the good guys, we are not so many. So there is certainly some level of collaboration and discussions, and absolutely, we organized together with the American Botanical Council and other other competitors, if you want, to events on the fights of adulteration. And those events were fully packed. We had a lot of great speakers from the university, from the industry, from competitors, friends, etc. And it was a nice opportunity to see that we were all aligned for the good.
Those are great examples. And Angela McElwee in the webinar last week also was talking about coming together around particular plants, you know, that have challenges in that. So, and next week we're having a webinar focusing on saw palmetto with the idea of beginning to gather different perspectives around particular botanicals to help brainstorm solutions and ways to collaborate. I wanted to have a little time to look at some of these questions. There are two questions that seem to be similar, though, from a different point of view around how to demand for sustainability and the role, I think, of the consumer, meaning like the consumer in a health food store aisle, not a brand. And I wondered if either of you have thoughts on how a customer can demand for sustainability. And then Greg Cumberford added to that, is it a valid response to the min-max mentality that Brian describes to point out to industry purchasers that they're out of line with end consumer expectations? So ultimately, what role does a customer have to play in driving this?
You know, it's really interesting. I've seen that, you know, Mintel and others have certain data, but roughly it's about customers are willing to spend 40% more with products that align with their values. And I think that's already starting to demonstrate itself. But at the same time, we're super challenged because consumers are also skeptical of what manufacturers are saying, right? In other words, we're like, we've been lied to, or at least we feel like we can't trust what manufacturers are saying. And yet we also are willing to invest more in products that do align with our expectations of, you know, responsibly sourced and those types of values. So it's a super challenging landscape. And I actually kind of lean back to some guidance that I've seen from Google, of all places, you know, and it's talking about consumer habits. They're super curious, right? And also impulsive. So what are ways that we as suppliers can support the brands that we cater to? How can we support them with that curiosity, discovery element, right? And I like to say that consumers, in other words, want to say, show me, don't tell me, right? Or let me see for myself. And that's why one of the things we're working on is trying to give assets, give such a transparent story to our customers that they can adopt it for themselves and the end consumer can discover that. But it's super challenging. I mean, the grocery stores will show you by the growing natural and organic segments that these type of products are in demand. But certainly there's more to it, right? And that's some of the kind of challenges that are faced on it.
Andrea, I wonder if you could follow up on that, but specifically from your perspective at Euromed, what allows you from your buyers, so that would be brands, I assume, what conditions help you do your work better, like allow you to make more investments in all of the efforts that you are? Is it long-term prices, you know, contract, you know, I don't know, but what specific?
It's the support. Mostly is the support for their development of their products, the support in terms of providing quality documents, and also the possibility to mention and to use some of our initiatives. For example, I don't know, the one that has been published on the Sustainable Herbs Project on Sow Palmetto, the recycling of the waste material that is reused as a sort of natural dye. And all these initiatives are providing an extra value of the company that, of course, on the basis must have a strong scientific and technological offer. So this is, we try to invest in all the aspects in order to provide a full package of quality and science. So technologies, the story, the certifications, initiatives, putting our face in initiatives like against adulteration of products, etc. So it's really a full-time job, like a 24 hours to 24.
Is it from buyers? Do you have short-term buyer, people who buy from you, your customers, or do you prefer long-term contracts or price buying? You know, what sorts of specific financial relationships?
We work more on long-term contracts, and most of our major customers have been our customer for many, many years.
Mm-hmm. It's similarly with us. I mean, our business is definitely run by our larger businesses that have customers that have been with us over time. And as I mentioned before, even kind of push our sustainability initiatives because they are in alignment with us. But to Andrea's point, it starts with quality for sure. I mean, the credibility piece goes with, hey, do you have a quality ingredient that you can verify that is third-party tested, et cetera, right? Is it on time? All those things. Does it perform as up to where you say it does? All those pieces. And then from there, the next question that we hope to hear is this sustainability piece, right? You know, that's the barrier for entry. You know, quality documents, validating against adulteration and, you know, product verification, all that. You know, that's the barrier for entry. Every quality supplier should have that, right? What's beyond that mark, right? That's where you start to get the more progressive conversation into real sustainable, you know, practices from there. I mean, unfortunately, I've seen too many companies that have more time put into the marketing of their sustainable program than they're actually fulfilling it. So, you know, that it's a tough world. There's no wonder that people are skeptical. I'm one of them, but.
Well, and what I hear you both saying is that, and what I want to do with Sustainable Herbs Program is show that quality, you can't, the sustainability isn't separate. It's not like the next step. You can't talk about them without, in the same way you can't talk about adulteration without talking about quality. You know, they're all woven together.
Yeah, and to, you know, these companies that are involved with ABC and the Sustainable Herbs Program, you know, to all their credit, sustainability is a less sexy marketing piece of the puzzle, right? Nobody's searching necessarily for these pieces, at least right off the bat. It's like a nice to have, it seems like. So, you know, the companies that are going forward and investing in this type of publicity and this type of support for these programs, I mean, hats off to them all, because that, you know, it's something that should be celebrated more than it is.
We've come to the end of the hour. I wanted to give you each like 30 seconds to a minute just to say, Andrea, starting with you, what's at stake for you? Why personally does this work matter?
Well, contributing to the health of people is not only a business, but is a personal motivation. I love translational research. I write articles, books. I love teaching or presenting, and I'm really motivated not only to produce good products, but also to use good products and without impacting the environment as much as possible. Those are my main motivators. And with Euromed, I have definitely found a very comfortable place to express all these feelings.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, you know, for me, I've been fortunate. My mother is the CEO of our company, Andrea Zapp, and she's been towing me around since I was a child to these foreign countries and exploring botanicals. And so from a young age, I started to see the world in a very interesting light. And I started to see these different business models of, you know, longevity style of thinking, you know, not short-term thinking. And to me, that's the biggest perspective piece of it all. And that's one of the most fulfilling, is how can we, as an ingredient supplier, inspire, really, I think is the key word, inspire others to think long-term and also show that, demonstrate it. That is where the fun part comes in. And when we get to build these materials and bring our customers along to our coffee farms or turmeric farm or wherever and show them, right? That's where it becomes that true inspiration. And that's where what's contagious, right? You want to influence change in others. You demonstrate that change, and that is something that others can kind of follow, right? And ride along. So that's something that we've done as well. Our customers that we are building on are inspiring us. And so it's a great cycle that continues to fulfill itself. I think that to me is the most exciting piece about this, and the most important, because it really goes full circle in that regard.
Great, thank you so much. And there's so many more questions I could ask, and it's just the beginning of a continued conversation. But thank you both so much, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. And it'll be available the recording will be available on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And Sahar, can you show the slide? Next week we have a webinar on saw palmetto, which will be Stephen Foster, Stefan Gaffner, Ed Fletcher, and Ume from Umasada and Paul from Valenza. And that's October 8th from 2 to 3 p.m. And then the following Thursday, we have the continuation of the ethnobotany series. And I'm very much looking forward to speaking to Dr. Claudia Ford about her historical research on cotton, use of cotton and black haul on slave plantations. So all of that information is available on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And thank you again so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.